Welcome back. This is Alex from Studio Trejo, and today we're going to review the Canon 35-105 f3.5 NFD zoom lens. This lens is part of my journey to find a vintage zoom with a great focal length, a constant aperture, and for it to render a more organic cinematic feel to my content. I reviewed the Vivitar 35-105 f3.5 for the same reason, and you can check out those results in the link below. But now, some brief history on this Canon zoom. It's the 1980s, and Canon was riding high on their sales of the AE1 and had built a solid reputation for their FD line of lenses. Canon was now marketing the second generation of the FDs as New FD, moving away from their breech lock system to the bayonet mount. With hobbyists loving the convenience and pros demanding greater performance from these zooms, in April 1981, Canon introduced the 35-105 f3.5 NFD. Could this zoom have the needed aberration control at wide angles while still rendering the sharp and beautiful imagery Canon lenses are renowned for? Let's find out by jumping into the key features of this lens. The Canon 35-105 f3.5 NFD has a maximum and constant aperture of f3.5 and stops down to f22. It has 5 aperture blades that create 10-pointed sun stars on bright points of light. It weighs 600 grams or 1.3 pounds, and it has a large 72 diameter filter thread size. This lens has 15 elements in 13 groups. The minimum focus distance is 5 feet or 1.5 meters from the focus plane. But like many zoom lenses of this time, it has a clever trick to give you close focusing. There's a macro switch that can only be engaged at 35mm. It allows you to turn the zoom past the 35mm mark, converting the zoom ring into a focus ring for the close focus function. Your minimum focus decreases from 5 feet to about 1 foot. So it isn't macro, but you can get really close to your subject. Now let's talk about build quality and handling. Not only were NFDs known for changing over to a bayonet system, but Canon turned away from the metal housing of their lenses and instead went with hard plastics for the body. The negative is that the plastic body may feel cheap in your hands, especially if you're used to a mostly metal body on a vintage lens. But the positive is that the lens is relatively light compared to a metallic 35-105 that can weigh you down over the course of the day. So it's a nice change to have a vintage zoom that can balance well on a mirrorless camera. My copy of this lens has a clicky aperture ring with a very smooth focus throw, reminiscent of Canon's NFD primes, and it has hard stops at minimum and infinity, which is great for video work. The zoom ring is a little loose for my taste. I find myself changing the focal length by accident by just giving it a light tap. It could just be my copy, and honestly, it's not really that big of a deal. It's just something to keep in mind. The body has a nice glossy sheen to it, and it's made in Japan. Now let's check out image quality. At 35mm f3.5, the center is sharp and gets softer at the edges. There is some chromatic aberration, but nothing terrible. The sharpness spreads out at f4 and 5.6. At 50mm f3.5, the center is sharp, but the edges look softer than at 35. Stop it down and everything normalizes. 105mm is the softest in the focal range at f3.5, but stopping it down to f4 improves it greatly and more at 5.6, but the edges continue to be soft. It's significant that this zoom lens is good at 35mm wide open. In that time, wide-angle zoom lenses were very difficult to make. The calculations needed to get maximum image quality while controlling aberrations was daunting and the weak point of a wide-angle zoom. But this lens, 35mm wide open, is clean and crisp and has great colors. Testing this lens also brought out another fun feature. The lens is parfocal, meaning it doesn't lose its focus when zooming in and out. I tried it at different focal ranges and the focus changes were minimum or none at all. This is a huge plus when doing video work, especially since cinema lenses, which are parfocal, amongst other things, are very expensive. So you video shooters might want to check this lens out. Next, vignetting. Vignetting is present in this zoom and it stays with the image until f5.6, where it lessens, but it's not really completely gone. So it's sharper at 35mm than other zooms that I've tested, but there is heavy vignetting. Next, lens flare. Lens flare is very cool on this lens if you like that sort of thing. It's big and round and it can make your photos and video have that extra character, or it'll ruin your shot. So this is something you need to decide if you want it for your content or not. Bokeh. The bokeh at f3.5 is just okay at 35mm, and you would need a larger aperture to have more blur in the background. But as you begin to zoom in, the bokeh increases, leaving very smooth out of focus blur. The Canon colors are very beautiful, and this lens renders them on the cooler side of the spectrum. And it renders inky blacks for your black and whites. I love using this lens for video. It's lightweight for handheld shooting, and the two-touch system and its parfocal qualities really lend itself to video work. There's an organic feel to the images, sharp but not too sharp, and the colors have a nice pop to them. Overall, a very nice lens for run and gun. There are drawbacks to this 40-year-old lens. The macro is not really a macro and can only be engaged at 35mm, which is limiting. The front element rotates as you focus, and vignetting is noticeable, and price-wise, it's on the higher end of other lenses with similar focal lengths. What's my take on this lens? This lens is a gem of a zoom. Its focal range is very useful. The constant f3.5 makes it an easy choice to bring with you for all-day shoots, even when the sun starts to go down. And this lens is a keeper for me. If you find one, check it out. If you liked this video, hit the like and subscribe button below, and we will see you on the next vintage lens review.